Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is February 3rd, 2024, Saturday, February 3rd, 2024. And let's cut to the chase. Let's go to the first story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled, What Happened to Julie's Body? Julie Mott's body disappeared in August 2015. It was given to the Mission Park Funeral Home, and what happened to it is still a mystery. Julie died on August 8th from cystic fibrosis. Her family attended services at Mission Park Funeral Home on August 15, which was her 26th birthday. The day of the service, her family left except Bill Wilburn, her ex-boyfriend, who stayed behind for 15 minutes. The employees escorted him to the door, and they left soon after, activating the alarm system on the way out. The next morning, Julie's casket was empty. It had a damaged hinge, but police could not find any evidence of forced entry into the building. The alarm had not been triggered either. Julie's body was scheduled to be cremated. The premises had no surveillance cameras, making it difficult for police to determine whether multiple individuals were involved. Suspicion fell immediately on Wilburn, who was said to have been obsessed with Julie even though the relationship had ended 2 years before. They had dated for 6 years. A reward for $20,000 was offered, and despite an investigation by the San Antonio police, she has not been found. Court documents found a business relationship between the funeral home and Bear and Beitel, a subcontractor. Mission Park initially denied using subcontractors to embalm or transport bodies, but eventually admitted to using them for several years. Bear and Beitel had keys and the alarm codes to the funeral home in order to deliver or pick up bodies after hours. After this was exposed, the funeral home limited access to their facility only when their personnel was on site. Shortly before the disappearance of Julie Mott's body, Bear and Beitel were named in another lawsuit regarding the mishandling of a body. Its parent company, MPII Inc., had been sued for damages and breach of contract a dozen times in the past 17 years. Wilburn continued with his odd behavior. In February 2016, the family reported to the police that he would call and ask about updates on the search for Julie's body. 4 months later, he violated a trespass order at the funeral home several times. He was seen on security camera footage driving repeatedly around the building, looking through windows, shaking doorknobs, and staring right into the cameras. He was arrested twice and charged with trespassing. In February 2018, a jury awarded $8 million to Julie's parents over the loss of their daughter's body by Mission Park Funeral Home. They were accused of negligence and gross negligence. They in turn accused Bill Wilburn of stealing the body. During the jury trial, it was revealed that the alarm code for the buildings hadn't been changed in 20 years, and that nearly 24 people knew the access code. During court proceedings, a security expert testified that the security system could be easily manipulated by placing an object on the door's alarm plunger to simulate that the system was still engaged, which is why it appeared the alarm did not go off. During the civil trial against Bear and Beitel Mortuary Services, an attorney asked Frederick Beyer, the owner, about Nicholas Moreno, one of his employees. The Mott's family attorney brought up allegations of Satanism related to Moreno. His band, Flesh Hoarder, and disturbing images posted on his Facebook profile were said to be construed as demonic and satanic. Mr. Beyer said Moreno had worked for the funeral home as a driver for 5 years. He was considered a good employee. He denied that Moreno had any contact with Julie Mott's body. He's testified he's into Satan, Alex Katzman, an attorney representing the Mott family, said in court. Did you know that? No, said Frederick Beyer. I didn't know anything about Satan. Julie's body has never been recovered, even though her family offered a reward in order to identify who took her. This would not be the last time the Mission Park Funeral Home faced a snafu when it comes to bodies left in their care. In November 2020, Mary Lou Salinas and Catalina Cervantes died within days of each other. Both were sent to the funeral home, who were to arrange their burial. On November 24th, during the funeral service, Cervantes' family told the director the body in the casket did not look good. They had not seen her for a month, and after she was embalmed, She was kept in storage for 2 weeks, which is why the family thought she looked different. 2 weeks later, Salina's service was held. The family told the funeral staff the woman in the casket was a stranger. They were informed at that time that Mary Lou Salinas had been buried by mistake a few days before, but they should continue with the service since family and friends were already at the funeral home. Salinas was exhumed and identified by her family, which confirmed that the bodies had been swapped and buried under the wrong name. As morbid as it sounds, there is a monetary reason why Julie's body might have been stolen, and it's the greatest motivator of all, money. On June 14, 2023, Cedric Lodge, the morgue manager who worked at Harvard Medical School since 1995, was indicted. He is facing federal charges of selling heads, brains, skin, and other body parts. These were taken from cadavers donated to Harvard Medical School for research and education. Harvard fired him on May 6, 2023, and he is awaiting to go to trial in April 2024. Part of the investigation included workers in different mortuaries who were selling bodies, which were supposed to be cremated either after the medical school used them or if this was the final disposition by the family after death, as was the case with Julie. There are other persons who collect human body parts or bones to include in their macabre collection. One of them is Jeremy Pauly, who owns the Memento Mori Museum. Pauly, who was a purchaser in the criminal scheme, pled guilty to his charges and admitted his role in a nationwide network of individuals who bought and sold human remains stolen from HMS, which is Harvard Medical School, and an Arkansas mortuary. The press release also stated that 5 other individuals, including Lodge, are pending trial. So, believe it or not, and I was surprised myself to find out about this, that there is a business of body parts, either for people that collect, like for collections. Some I know are for some ritual purposes, and there's others that sell body parts for medical purposes. But in the case I was think of Julie, since she has cystic fibrosis, sometimes if a person is either very, very old or they have some type of disease, they can't reuse their body parts as far as for medical purposes or for tissue to living human beings, that is, because of their condition. But I've also heard that, and I'm sorry, that there's been companies that have been caught selling, you know, parts and tissues, etc., for medical purposes when they weren't supposed to. So, yeah, that's a deep, deep hole. And that thing about that you have a driver who's into Satanism and dead body parts. Yeah, there's a lot of ritual use for stuff like that. So, yeah, there's that first one. Food for thought. Next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and it's titled The Tradition of All Souls Day. All Souls Day is celebrated November 2nd and is dedicated to those who have died and have not reached heaven. They are either in purgatory or unhappy ghosts. There are 3 days that are frequently confused with dealing with the spirits of the departed. Halloween, October 31st, which is believed to be when the veil is thinnest between this world and those of the dead. All Saints is a church-wide holy day of obligation and normally celebrated on November 1st. It's also known as All Hallows Day, and it is dedicated to the saints and martyrs of the church. That is, all those who have attained heaven. And November 2nd, All Souls Day, is the one where remembrance is made of those that have died, especially family members, but there are special efforts made to appease the ghosts of those who have no family and have been forgotten, because these spirits in their unhappiness can cause a lot of trouble for the living. All Saints' Day, which began most likely as All Martyrs' Day, can be traced to the earliest Christians. In 609, during the reign of Pope Boniface IV, the Eastern Emperor Phocas gifted a temple in Rome to the Holy See. The timing could not have been better, since a year later, Heraclius succeeded in taking Constantinople on October 5th, 610, and executed Phocas on the same day before declaring himself the emperor. Pope Boniface accepted this temple, removed all the pagan embellishments, all the statues were relocated, and he buried the remains of hundreds of Christian martyrs beneath the Pantheon. The Pope then consecrated the Pantheon as a Christian church to the Blessed Mother and all the holy martyrs. This consecration took place on May 13, and that was the annual date of the Feast of All Martyrs for the next 125 years. However, there are some who maintain the belief that it had its origins in the pagan observation of the Feast of the Lemurs, in which the malevolent and restless spirits of the dead were propitiated. Liturgists based the idea that the Lemuria festival was the origin of All Saints and All Souls Day because of their identical dates and because they share the similar theme of all the dead. The temple still standing is known as the Pantheon and was originally built in the 1st century. Destroyed by fire and rebuilt between 118 and 128, it was a public place to worship and honor all the Roman gods and goddesses, a spectacular monument to pagan Rome. Chief among the Roman people was Jupiter Ammon, god of sky and thunder. There was also the worship of Janus and Vesta, the powers of the door and hearth. Janus originally stood for the magic of the door of a private house or hut, and later became a part of the state religion. The gates of his temple were formally closed when the state was at peace, a custom going back to the primitive war magic that required armies to march out to battle by a properly sanctified route. Vesta's shrine contained the eternal fire. The cult of Vesta, tended by her virgins, continued to flourish until the end of antiquity, endowed with an important role in the sacred protectorship of Rome. Vestal virgins were priestesses who vowed abstinence for 30 years to focus on tending to the sacred fire at the temple of Vesta. There were 46 Vestal virgins who tended the fire. The virgins would be chosen at an early age by the chief priest and would take their vows of chastity then. Once their 30 years had completed, they were free to marry, even though many would be beyond childbearing years. Ancient Greeks and Romans had an average lifespan of 20 to 35 years of age. Few Vestal virgins would ever marry, as their servitude had been to Vesta for so long. They were highly regarded, and if they broke their vow, they were severely punished. Vestal virgins typically took their designation very serious, and few ever broke the vow. Lemuria. The Lemuralia, or Lemuria, was an annual event in the religion of ancient Rome, during which the Romans performed rites to exorcise any malevolent and fearful ghosts of the restless dead from their homes. They were known as lemures or larvae, and were the spirits of slain enemies, and spirits of those who didn't have living relatives that could properly honor them. They were propitiated with chants and offerings of black beans. They also honored their deceased ancestors, which was the lares. It was celebrated at night and in silence and during 3 alternate days, May 9th, 11th, and 13th. During this season, the temples of the gods were closed, and it was thought unlucky for women to marry at this time and during the whole month of May, and those who ventured to marry were believed to die soon after. They marry badly who marry in May. The virgin priestesses at the temple of Vesta prepared a sacred mola salsa, or salted flour, made from the first ears of wheat of the season. This was sprinkled on an altar that held sacred fire, which they were charged to keep it lit as priestesses, and animals would be sacrificed on it. A ritual performed on May 13th involved throwing the puppets of 30 old men into the Tiber River from the Pons Sublicius. It is the earliest known bridge of ancient Rome, spanning the Tiber River near the Forum Boarium, downstream from the Tiber Island near the foot of the Aventine Hill. Publicly, there were games held in the Circus Maximus in honor of Mars on the 11th and on the 13th in commemoration of the dedication of the Temple of Mercury in 495 BC. The merchants offered up incense and used laurel branches to sprinkle water from the well of Mercury at the Porta Capena over themselves and their goods in order to obtain Mercury's aid in making their businesses prosper. The lemures, being neglected in death, were free to leave their dead body, but could not enter the afterlife. The larvae were less common but considered more mischievous and dangerous, and they usually accompanied lemures. Before starting, the family would make sure there were no knots present during the ceremony, since they could block natural forces to flow properly. The head of the household, with the other family members trailing behind, would walk barefoot through the house at midnight. He washed his hands in spring water and would put his thumb between the forefinger and third finger of his hand. This was known as the mano fica, or fig hand. This gesture would ward off any ghost, since this was considered a overtly sexual gesture and expected to distract evil spirits from causing harm. Then he would take a mouthful of black beans and either spit them or throw them over his shoulder. This was believed to lure the hungry lemures. He would chant, "I send thee, with these beans I redeem me and mine. Ghosts of my fathers and ancestors, be gone. This would be repeated 9 times, and the household would clash bronze pots at the end of each prayer. It was only then that the head of the household would look behind him to make sure that the lemuri were gone. Larvae, on the other hand, were thought to have been entirely unforgiven, even demonic. Some of the literature presents them as persecuting the living and torturing bad souls in Hades. The 3 days of Lemuralia and the performance of an Argai ceremony in the same month, supposedly a substitute for former human sacrifices, made the whole month of May unlucky for marriages. The Argai rituals took place on March 16th and March 17th, and again on May 14th or May 15th. This was supposed to enact when human sacrifices were made to Saturnus. The victims' hands and feet were bound, and they were thrown into the waters of the Tiber River. Eventually, the human victims were replaced with straw mannequins. The rite possibly used the victims as scapegoats for purification or to appease the souls of those who had died from drowning. There is much mystery attached to the origins of this ceremony, which is theorized to hide a darker meaning, especially for the rituals held in May. This fear of ghosts coming to haunt the living were believed not only in Rome but in ancient Mesopotamia and Greece. Lack of proper burial is a consistent theme, since rites were very important in ancient religions. On November the 1st, 735, Pope Gregory III dedicated St. Peter's Basilica to house the relics of apostles and martyrs. This is when the date became known as the Feast of All Saints. This in turn suppressed May 13th with its connection to the pagan feast of the Lemures. Prayers for those who have died dates back to ancient times. In the second book of Maccabees, 100 BC, Judas Maccabeus ordered his army to pray and offer sacrifices for their fallen comrades. Roman catacombs are inscribed with prayer requests for the dead. The commemoration of the faithful departed, or All Souls' Day, evolved into the church calendar long after All Saints' Day. Spurred by recommendation of St. Odilo, remembering and praying for the faithful departed is tied directly to a belief in purgatory. Families go to cemeteries to light candles, clean the tombs, and display pictures of their dead family members. Church bells are sometimes rung to remind everyone to pray for the poor souls in purgatory. In Portugal, ofrendas, Spain and Mexico, offerings called ofrendas are made on this day. In Mexico, it coincides with the Dia de los Inocentes, or Day of the Innocents, which specifically remember children that have died. In some parts of Portugal, children go door to door where they receive cakes, nuts, and pomegranates. In Austria, Belgium, France, Hungary, Italy, Luxembourg, Malta, Portugal, Spain, and American cities such as New Orleans, people take flowers to the graves of dead relatives. In Poland, the Czech Republic, Sweden, Finland, Slovakia, Lithuania, Croatia, Austria, Romania, Moldova, Hungary, and Catholic parts of Germany, the tradition is to light candles and visit the graves of deceased relatives. In the Philippines, this day called Undas or Todos los Santos is observed as All Souls' Day. November 1st and 2nd are spent visiting the graves of family members and making sure they are clean and well taken care of. It appears that since ancient times, the living understand that lack of proper burial or remembrance will make for an unhappy human soul who will come back and haunt the living. And this is really interesting because, again, this is not the first time that you see that pagan rites or ceremonies were either blocked out or replaced, with early Christian um, early Christian ceremonies or locations like this one, the Pantheon, that was taken over and made and dedicated as a church, when in reality it was a major temple for pagan beliefs by the Romans. So there you go. I mean, you never know. Okay, next story is out of Vintage News, and it's titled Colossus of Rhodes, the ancient wonder that towered over Greece. In the annals of ancient wonders, few have captured the imagination quite like the Colossus of Rhodes, a marvel of ancient engineering standing tall over the island of Rhodes in Greece. This gigantic statue not only served as a symbol of victory, but also as a testament to the ingenuity and artistic prowess of the ancient Greeks. The Colossus of Rhodes wasn't just a marvel of its time, it continues to inspire awe and curiosity even today. In 305 BC, Rhodes was under siege by Demetrius Poliorcetes. Poliocretes, however, the Rhodians successfully defended their city. To celebrate their victory and to showcase their strength, they decided to build a giant statue of their patron god Helios. The construction was funded by selling the siege equipment left behind by Demetrius's fleeing army. This act of turning tools of war into a symbol of peace and prosperity is a fascinating tale of resilience and resourcefulness. The construction of Colossus was an engineering feat. Led by the sculptor Charles of Lindos, the statue took 12 years to complete, from 292 to 280 BC. It was made of iron tie bars and brass plates, with stone blocks used for the base. The statue stood approximately 33 meters high, making it one of the tallest statues of the ancient world. This construction technique used were revolutionary, involving complex scaffolding and the careful placement of massive bronze plates. The ingenuity involved in its construction remains a topic of study and admiration among historians and engineers alike. In 226 BC, the statue was destroyed by an earthquake, breaking it at its weakest point, the knees. Despite offers from various rulers to rebuild it, the Rhodians declined, believing it to be a sign of hubris to rebuild something the gods had destroyed. The ruins lay on the ground for over 800 years, a testament to its former glory. It wasn't until the 7th century AD that the remains were finally sold off by invading forces. The story of its fall, as much as its construction, adds a layer of tragic beauty to the legend of the Colossus. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a list compiled by ancient Greek historians that included the most remarkable creations of classical antiquity. Today, the Colossus continues to inspire art, literature, and even modern engineering projects. The Colossus of Rhodes may no longer stand, but its story endures. It serves as a powerful symbol of the triumphs and tragedies that are part of our collective human history. The tale of the Colossus, with its blend of history, myth, and inspiration, continues to fascinate and inspire, making it a timeless wonder of the ancient world. By the way, one of the secrets that the Greeks had was that even the Romans didn't know how to do it, is that they knew how to make a statue stand. If you look at statues that I don't think they ever figured it out. It took them a while. If you look at their statues need some type of bar or something to make them stand. They could never figure out how the Romans could get their statues to stand without any type of support system, like by themselves. So there you go. Anyway, let's go back to Stranger Than Fiction stories. This is one titled The Spirit of Mr. Sherman. In November 1873, Almond P. Sherman was a general superintendent for the American Express Company in Buffalo, New York. None would believe the well-liked man would come back as a haunting spirit. It was a Monday and Mr. Sherman wasn't feeling well. He drove to see his physician, Dr. King. The doctor gave him a prescription and told him to go home as soon as possible. He made a stop at the drugstore and took a seat to wait for his order. Suddenly, he dropped off the chair and died on the spot. It turned out a large blood vessel in his heart ruptured. He was known to suffer from angina pectoris. He left behind a widow and 3 children. He was buried at Forest Lawn Cemetery. During the Civil War, he served with the 124th Regiment, New York Infantry, Company D, as a hospital steward. Normally, that would have been the end of the sad affair, but it seemed Mr. Sherman missed the part about him dying. In February 1874, it was reported that American Express allowed his widow to keep the rooms over the stables of the company. They even made sure she had coal to keep her warm during the winter months. Then Jane Sherman started to hear her husband's footsteps on the stairs. He would walk into the room, sit upon the bed, and pull off his boots. She didn't see anything, just heard him. She fled from the apartment, but then decided it was her imagination. The next evening, the scene was repeated, and this time men in the barn plainly heard the steps. Friends were called who heard the same thing. Mrs. Sherman fled and decided not to return. She died in 1890, and it's unknown if Mr. Sherman ever stopped haunting the apartment over the American Express stables. It's really interesting because several people heard it, and it made the newspapers. And I did look up, this man really did exist. There's his obituary, and it's almost exactly like what I said. I don't know, because he just dropped dead all of a sudden. Maybe he missed the part about the You're not among the living, but there you go. The next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and it's titled The Wreck of the Coos Bay. On October 22nd, 1927, the lumber schooner Coos Bay went wrecked outside Golden Gate off Mile Rock, while a thick fog covered the area. It had a crew of 30 and no passengers, but it seemed in the coming days that there was a 31st person on the ship. The ship started as the collier Vulcan owned by the Pacific States Lumber Company. In its last incarnation, it was named the SS Coos Bay. She was captained by B.W. Olson. The vessel was outward bound for Coos Bay, Oregon, and as it lay stuck at Land's End, the terrific seas pounded her, breaking the vessel up amidship. She had a large hole in her engine room. Within 2 days, it seemed salvaging the ship seemed remote. The reason given for the wreck was a confusion of whistles and failure to hear the Mile Rock horn. The Coast Guard removed the crew off the ship, but not without mishap. A shot was fired from the vessel in an effort to carry a lifeline ashore and struck a home a mile away. Close by the wreck was the Lyman Stewart, which was still prisoner of jagged rocks where it grounded several years before. The circumstances were so difficult, the company that owned the Coos Bay announced they had given up hope of salvaging her and turned her over to the underwriters. A ship that was valued by the underwriters for $470,000 was bought for $2,350 as junk. The low price was due to the hazard of wrecking work on the Coos Bay. Salvage operations were set to start immediately with a cable stretched from the wreck to the shore, and a car would be operated over the waves on a trolley, carrying workmen and tools. All that was being salvaged was the deck machinery, cable furnishings, and instruments, since the engines were beyond salvage. The whole would be left on the beach. On November 5th, the body of a man drifted on the beach near the wreck of the Coos Bay. Peter Belno, one of the many curiosity seekers, sighted the body and called police. Initially, it was assumed he was a sailor from the wreck. He was a powerfully built man of about 30 years of age and measured 5 feet 7 inches in height. He had light brown hair and was wearing blue trousers and a gray coat, but no underclothing. He had on black socks, but only one shoe. His clothing was of poor quality, and he was believed to be a manual worker. His skull had been fractured, the nose smashed, several ribs broken, and both wrists fractured. It was determined this was not a crewman, since the injuries were received after the ship had foundered. He had been in the water about 2 days. The police tried to match the corpse to any report of a missing person. One of them was George Parker of Boston, who was said to have left a $10,000 trust fund for his mother and dropped out of sight. He had left Boston for Seattle on September 3rd and had no other communication with the family. His brother William went to Seattle to investigate his disappearance. He learned his brother had left for San Francisco, and he followed him there, arriving at the St. Francis Hotel. The hotel register reflected that George had registered on October 31st. William Parker told police he feared George had killed himself after discovering the young woman he planned to wed was a married woman and was another man's wife for the previous 4 years. At least this was the story told by William E. Parker. As the mystery of the body in the surf played out, the captain of the Coos Bay was exonerated of blame for the wreck. It came down to bad atmospheric conditions in the Golden Gate at the time, and it was determined the accident could not have been avoided. Then the remains of the mystery man was identified by William Schmidt of Petaluma. He said he had been a lifelong friend of Herbert Pernack, 28, who lived at 2065 Sutter Street. He had gone missing since October 30th and was a crank on taking photographs of unusual scenes, no matter how difficult. He theorized that Pernack had fallen overboard after using the lines the work crew had in place to get on board the Coos Bay. Dr. Strange, the city autopsy surgeon, agreed the man drowned and was not a victim of foul play. The injuries to his body had probably been sustained after his body was thrashed by the waves against the jagged shoreline. But more than one mystery was solved on November 8, 1927. That day, the San Francisco police dropped the search for Mr. Parker, not because of the identification of Herbert Pernack, but because they were convinced George Parker was a wholly imaginary person. It turned out that personnel at the St. Francis Hotel confirmed that it was William E. Parker who came to the hotel from Portland on October 31st. They also spoke to Vivian Morris, who was the girl supposedly followed by George from Boston. She said there was no such person as George Parker and that William was trying to perpetrate a hoax. William, though, insisted he had a brother named George. He said he was an executive of the Parker Palmer Lumber Company of Boston. He said his brother resigned his position as supervising engineer of the United Fruit Company in Boston in order to follow a woman to Seattle. According to Mrs. Morris, she said William Parker had been following her and annoying her for 2 years. She said Parker had tried to convince her to divorce her husband and transfer her affection to him. Police verified that no such lumber company existed, and Harry A. Cobb, vice president of the firm of Parker and Parker, said they didn't have an executive named William E. Parker. Mr. Parker dropped from sight until 1933, when he was listed as a passenger along with his wife on the steamer San Bruno, belonging to the United Fruit Company, that was leaving to St. John and then heading to Cuba and Honduras. The only other passenger beside them was Miss Mildred V. Foster. Considering that in 1931 he attended his daughter's graduation from the Massachusetts General Hospital indicates he was married when he chased Vivian Morris across the country. He appeared to be a man obsessed, but discreet enough to give himself a false identification as a brother that didn't exist. So there you go. Some guy gets on a ship that's wrecked off the coast, you know, he gets killed by being stupid. But in the meantime, here comes this guy. Apparently he's married, but he's fixated and obsessed with his woman, follows her across the country. But in the meantime, I guess he's thinking I'm married, or who knows what he's thinking of. And invents a totally new person as a brother. I have to admit, good imagination there. Okay, next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and it's titled The Hexed House. It was after 1912 that the first houses were built overlooking Benedict Canyon in Beverly Hills. A spacious Bavarian-style house was constructed at 9820 Easton Drive in 1930 for Paul Byrne, an MGM executive. Why Grisly Death was to become a familiar visitor there remains a mystery. Completed when Prohibition was the law of the land, the architects hid a bar behind a bookcase. However, there would be darker secrets the house would keep as these years passed. On June 21st, 1932, Harleen Carpenter McGrew, 21, known better as Jean Harlow, announced her marriage to Paul Byrne. His real name was Paul Levy, 42, an executive at MGM Studios. He had helped to launch her career, and they had known each other since 1930. He was a bachelor who lived at 9820 Easton Drive. She had divorced Charles McGrew the year before, charging intoxication and cruelty. He, in turn, accused her of posing for indecent pictures. Whatever hopes the blonde bombshell had for her new romance were quickly dashed. 2 months after the July wedding, Paul was found dead. He'd been shot through the temple, and the bullet lodged in the wall behind him. He had been shot while standing nude before a full-length mirror in his dressing room. The revolver lay 6 feet from the body. Even though it appeared to be a suicide and was determined as such by the police, others thought it was murder. After the discovery of Byrne's body, the first call was not to the police, it was to MGM. They sent over their top fixers, who called the police 2 hours later. They were also the ones that told Jean Harlow about the death of her husband, since she had spent the night at her mother's house. Paul had never married, but had fallen in love with actress Barbara Lamar, born Reatha Dale Watson. However, she did not reciprocate the feeling, but they remained as friends. Her roles made her a famous vamp during the 1920s, but her fame was short-lived, when she died in 1926 from tuberculosis and nephritis when she was 29. By this time, she had been married 4 times, or 5 by her count, and had secretly given birth to a child in 1922, which she entrusted to the care of close friends. Some claim Byrne was the father, but DNA proved otherwise. Barbara's son died in 2014. The one who paid her medical bills and helped her when her health failed was Paul Byrne. Now, then we come to something else called the Millette mystery. As mysterious as Paul Byrne's death was, even stranger was the dearth of information about Dorothy Millette, the woman who was supposed to be his common-law wife. Much of the information about her past was inaccurate or totally false. While living in New York City, Byrne lived with Dorothy Millette, born Adele Roddy. They never married, but he supported her since she suffered from mental and emotional problems. At one point, she was committed to a Connecticut sanatorium. On the night before his death, she was reported to have visited Byrne. She committed suicide 2 days later by jumping from the Delta King steamboat into the Sacramento River. All that was found by a night watchman was a woman's coat and shoes on the deck. Her body was found a week later. Adele Della Roddy was born to William Roddy and Lily N. Johnson in 1882 in Indianapolis, Indiana. They had two other children after Adele, Fiona and Mary Roddy. Her father was a laborer, and in 1889, his wife filed for divorce citing drunkenness, failure to provide, and unfaithfulness. In the suit, she was granted the divorce on June 21, 1889. Left with three daughters, Lily Roddy worked as a seamstress, and she became involved with a married man who promised to divorce his wife. Life was difficult, and by February 1894, Lily put her girls in the temporary care of the Board of Children's Guardians. A year later, the custody was permanent, where they were each doled out to different foster homes until 1905. The girls never returned to the care of their mother, and a note in their file stated, quote, Lilas Roddy was divorced from her husband W.H. Roddy and afterward married a Swede and renamed Lily Hade. She died and was a morphine fiend, as was W.H. Roddy. Mr. Barrett, her attorney, says she became demented. End quote. The girls worked as stenographers. Fiona married John Henselman in 1904. Mary married Charles Vinier in 1905. Adele, who also used the first name of Dorothy, married Lowell Mellett on June 22, 1907. They moved to Washington, where her husband was a local newspaper reporter. For some reason, Dorothy started spelling her last name as Millett, but considering the background she was fabricating for herself, it made sense on a certain level. In the meantime, her sister Fiona moved with her husband to Oregon, where he unexpectedly died in 1912 and she moved to California. Despite claims that Dorothy Millett met Paul Byrne in 1911, this does not match up with life events for Dorothy. They met on May 12th when she enrolled in the American Academy for the Dramatic Arts. Lowell Millett filed for divorce in 1913 from Dorothy because without just cause, defendant has continuously abandoned plaintiff for more than 1 year, last past. He secured a divorce, and a year later he married Berthe Natvold, who was an author and newspaper writer. No marriage certificate has ever been found for Paul Byrne and Dorothy Millett, but as of 1917 he stated on a naturalization application that he was married to Dorothy, and that she had been born on March 16, 1889 in France. Strangely, all three Roddy sisters adopted this fiction for their pasts. Perhaps having parents that were addicted to alcohol and drugs was a past they wanted to distance themselves from. During 1920, Paul and Dorothy were living in Manhattan. This was the year that Paul's mother died. Soon after, Dorothy was committed to Blythewood Sanitarium for 8 months, and then she lived until May 1932 at the Algonquin Hotel in New York City. During all these years, Paul Byrne paid all her expenses, even after he left to California in 1925. However, in his new life on the West Coast, he identified himself as single. Dorothy's sister Fiona married Herbert E. Hessler in 1932 in Washington, but returned to California. This was the same year her sister Dorothy killed herself, and the following year the other sister Mary, then known as Mary Hartraft, died from breast cancer. Ironically, Lowell Millett, Adele's ex-husband, or Dorothy Millett, whichever one you want to call her, went on to become a nationally known newspaper executive and presidential assistant. He was editor of Collier's Weekly and Washington Daily News. In 1937, he worked as director of the National Emergency Council and became director of the Office of Government Reports. In 1939, and from 1940 to 1944, as administrative assistant to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. He wrote a newspaper column from 1944 to 1956, and he died in 1960. In 1990, Samuel Marks published a book in which he claimed Byrne was killed by Dorothy Millett, and that MGM decided a suicide was less damaging to Jean Harlow's career. He wrote that he witnessed Irving Thalberg, an MGM executive, tampering with witness. These were the years when movie studios fiercely guarded the reputation and public persona of their stars, including strong-arming reporters to write stories they approved of or even interfering with police investigations. The employees, when questioned by the police, gave contradictory information as to the state of the marriage. They were painted as a couple devoted to each other, or where arguments between them were frequent. The cook said that night that Byrne took his life, she saw a strange woman walking around the property. Down by the swimming pool were two used glasses and a woman's swimsuit she didn't recognize. Who was the woman, and why had she disrobed by the pool? Later it was found that during Byrne's relationship with Harlow, he had an affair with his secretary, Irene Harrison. At the time of Millette's suicide, it was believed she had done away with herself after learning Byrne had changed his will, leaving everything to Jean Harlow, thereby leaving her penniless. Part of what Byrne willed to Jean Harlow was the house where he had lived for 4 years prior to the marriage. Another theory was that Byrne did indeed commit suicide due to an underdeveloped penis or impotence, something that he had suffered from for several years. For those who believed that Paul's death was a suicide, they looked into his past for the nexus of his problem. He was born in 1889 in Prussia, and his family immigrated to New York. His mother, Henriette Levy, was 41 years old when she gave birth to him. In 1908, his father died, leaving behind a wife and 6 children. 12 years later, his mother died, though what was labeled as an accident, but was it? She drowned, but some said she did it purposefully because she didn't approve of Millette, because she was not Jewish. Others suspect that when Byrne spoke of moving to the West Coast, his mother did not handle it well. Paul Byrne's attraction to beautiful but emotionally unstable women would be played out from Dorothy Millette, who once had her own aspirations as an actress, to Barbara Lamar, and lastly to Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow followed Paul to the grave 5 years later when she was 26 years old. She died from cerebral edema, a complication of kidney failure. She was buried in a pink negligee from one of her films. Many people claim that Byrne's death somehow hexed the house with a curse that has seen tragedy strike its occupants on multiple occasions. Allegedly, in the years that followed, 2 other people committed suicide in the Easton Drive home, and 1 person drowned in the pool, but this has not been confirmed. In 1950, Lauriston Clark, who lived at the address, died of a blood clot following an operation. He was 45 years old and left behind a widow named Virginia. It's unknown if she continued living in the home. In 1963, the ill-fated house on Easton Drive was purchased by young celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, who was attracted to its dark history. He rubbed elbows with all the A-list actors of the day and dated Sharon Tate from 1964 to 1966. Sharon spent time at the home, and even after the romance ended, they continued their friendship. It was during this time that Sharon Tate started to date her future husband, Roman Polanski. Jay Sebring was a real-life character that Warren Beatty's character was based upon in the film Shampoo. In August 1969, after Sharon Tate's murder, Dick Kleiner wrote an article about a creepy story Sharon told him in 1966. He recalled that then it was believed she was going to be a big star, but there was something strange about her. Some thought it was tied to her first movie titled 13, which was later changed to Eye of the Devil. Some wondered if she was taking her work home with her. She was staying at the house at 9820 Easton Drive, since she was between apartments and Jay offered his house. The property was less than a mile apart of where she would be killed 3 years later. She was asleep, but she kept a light on by the side of her bed. Tate told Kleiner, quote, "I saw a creepy little man. He looked like the pictures I'd seen of Byrne." She ran downstairs and then described, "I saw a vision of someone tied to the staircase. It might have been me. It might have been Jay. Whoever it was cut open at the throat. She needed a drink but couldn't find the liquor cabinet. But something told her to open a bookcase where she found a hidden bar. There was wallpaper below the secreted niche, and she picked at it and found it covered a beautiful copper base to the bar. Many people believe that the second ghost, the murdered one, was a chilling premonition which foreshadowed Sharon and Jay's own tragic deaths. In 1968, Roman Polanski was quoted as saying, "Happy endings make me puke," directed the film Rosemary's Baby, which was considered blasphemous for its satanic theme. By then, Polanski was married to Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant when she was murdered along with Jay, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent by the Manson family in August 1969. After his murder, Jay Sebring's house was sold to a doctor and his family. David Oman, who owns the Oman House on Cielo Drive, right down from the property where Sharon and Jay were murdered, claims that he has seen the apparition of Jay in his home, which he built after 2001. Given all the deaths and tragedies associated with the house on Easton Drive, many believe it is haunted both by the ghost of Paul Byrne and Jay Sebring. The estate also had a carriage house where the staff was boarded in Burns and Harlow's time. At some point, the carriage house was parceled off from the main house and sold separately. The carriage house hit the market in 2014, and the 1,100 square foot property sold for over $855,000. Some of the stories attributed to the property on Easton Drive might have occurred at a nearby house in Benedict Canyon. The murder of Sharon Tate at 10050 Cielo Drive in 1969 was obvious for the time Sharon spent at the house on Easton Drive, and Jay's own murder. A few blocks away at 1436 Bella Drive is Rudolph Valentino's home, Falcon's Lair. At the height of his career as a silent movie heartthrob known as the Latin Lover, he died in 1926 at the age of 31. Cause of death was gastric ulcers that developed into peritonitis. At the north side of Benedict Canyon Road, at 1579 Clearview Drive, is the home of Joe Flynn of McHale's Navy fame. He drowned in his swimming pool in 1974 after suffering a heart attack. And there you go. Is it coincidence? I mean, people die, at houses, but, you get massacred and this guy shoots himself. And did he really shoot himself? Or did Dorothy Millay come and shoot him because even if they were never technically married and he had been sending her money, she knew that if anything ever happened to him, that's it. She would have no money left. Or maybe even told her, hey, I'm not going to keep supporting you anymore. I mean, if you think about it that way. As far as, what is she going to do? All right. And this next one is out of UPI. And it's titled, Florida Park Announces Name for Beyond Rare White Alligator. A Florida reptile park announces extremely rare white alligator baby has a new name, Mystic. The leucistic alligator was born in December at Gatorland, Orlando, and the park said in a Facebook post at the time that the reptile's arrival was beyond rare. Leucism is similar to albinism, but leucistic animals still have some pigment in their eyes and skin, whereas albinos are completely devoid of pigment. Gatorland announced in a video that the white baby alligator had been dubbed Mystic, while her twin brother, sporting more typical alligator colors, was named Mayhem. That's cute. I like that. Look at that. Let's see if this will play. Hold on.
Hot diggity dog. This is a great day right here at Gatorland. There were 7 leucistic alligators like Trezos right here in the world. That was it. But now there are 8 of them. We had this little baby, the first little leucistic baby ever born in the care of man. And we're so excited about it. So we ran a contest for all you folks to help us name them. And we had hundreds of great names come in. And what's the name of the little white one, Danielle?
Her name is Mystic.
Mystic?
Mystic.
Oh, Mystic the Leucistic?
Knee slapper.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's Mystic the Leucistic. I love that. What about her little brother?
His name is Mayhem.
Mayhem, and that fits him perfect. He's a crazy little guy. Every time we're trying to take pictures, he's trying to bite us, aren't you? Stop trying to bite me. Oh, great name. Mystic the Leucistic and her brother Mayhem. Oh, man, we're building them exhibit right here in the White Gator Swamp. Should be open by spring break. Love you guys. Thank you for helping us. And come on out and see them.
That's pretty good. That's pretty neat. I like that. All right, guys. And here we go. I will be back soon with more stories from Eerie News and other unusual things. But until next time, take care.